The cold was a physical thing, not just a temperature, but a pressure that weighed on the exposed skin and seeped into the layers of synthetic fiber designed to resist it. It was the deep, uncompromising cold of the high desert plateau in January, a place where air froze moisture out of breath instantly, creating tiny, sparkling ghosts that vanished an inch from the face. General Morrison hated the cold. He hated the dust that coated everything in a fine ochre film, and he hated the insistent mechanical thrum of the diesel generators running 24 hours a day, the sound penetrating his skull like a dull, perpetual headache. He was seated at the makeshift command table inside the main prefabricated structure, the big box, an aluminum and Kevlar-reinforced sardine can that smelled permanently of stale coffee, hydraulic fluid, and the faint, acrid scent of burned gunpowder that perpetually clung to the air filter vents. He tapped a manicured finger impatiently on a laminated map showing the grid coordinates of the current infiltration zone. He had been waiting for the satellite link to stabilize for 30 minutes, and the delay had curdled his already sour mood. "Hartwell!" he barked, his voice loud enough to cut through the low-frequency drone. "Where's the damn water? I asked for hot water 10 minutes ago." Lieutenant Hartwell, his newly assigned aide and liaison from the Joint Task Force, stood precisely 3 paces from the general's right shoulder, where she had been standing for the last 4 hours. She was unremarkable, efficient, maybe too quiet, dressed in regulation-issue field uniform that somehow looked pressed despite the conditions. Her dark hair was pulled back into a severe regulation bun. She possessed the necessary bureaucratic competence to manage his schedule and communications, but nothing more. "General," she replied, her voice low, almost flat, devoid of the inflection Morrison found so exhausting in junior officers. "The potable heating unit in the mess hall is running at 60% capacity due to the load shedding. I'm retrieving it now from the secondary unit in supply." Morrison waved a dismissive hand, not looking at her. "Just get the water, and while you're at it, find out why Colonel Davies hasn't reported back on the drone sweep data from Grid Charlie 7. This whole operation is moving at the pace of continental drift." Hartwell nodded once, a quick, almost imperceptible dip of the chin. She moved away from the table, her boots silent on the corrugated metal floor, a feat in itself, considering the heft of the standard-issue combat boots. Morrison watched her go, a flicker of irritation crossing his face. Hartwell was one of those officers who did everything right, which meant she had no discernible personality. She was a checklist, a drone. He preferred competence laced with sycophancy. Hartwell offered neither. She simply existed, fulfilling her function with a chilling efficiency that he found, frankly, insulting. He was a general of 3 stars. He deserved a better class of aide, one with ambition, not merely adherence to procedure. He turned back to the map, rubbing the bridge of his nose. The objective here, deep in hostile, contested territory, was to establish a permanent listening post. The enemy, a highly dispersed mobile extremist group known for its brutal efficiency, had been quiet for too long. Morrison felt that deceptive calm like a tension headache. Hartwell reappeared a minute later, holding a heavy ceramic mug. Morrison despised field plastics. Carefully balanced on a small, sterile tray, steam rose lazily from the mug, carrying the faint scent of minerals and purification chemicals. As she set the mug down precisely beside his map case, her movements betrayed zero haste, zero anxiety, just perfect control. Morrison glanced up. Her face was neutral, eyes focused on the task. Her uniform collar was buttoned high, stiff and starched, covering almost all of her neck. He noticed only the small, heavy silver ring on her left hand, plain, unadorned, the metal slightly blackened as if exposed to immense heat. He had meant to ask her about it, but the thought always vanished. "General, the water is 85 degrees Celsius, she stated. "I used the low calcium reserve." "Good," Morrison grunted, reaching for the mug. "Now where is Davies? And pull up the weather report. I need to know if this bloody wind is going to drop before sundown." Hartwell moved to the communication station, already pulling up the secure terminal login. "General, regarding Colonel Davies," Hartwell said, her back to him, her fingers flying over the keyboard with the speed of a professional typist. "I checked the comm logs 10 minutes ago. He is 30 minutes overdue for his scheduled check-in. His transponder beacon went silent at 14:03 Zulu, just past the boundary of Grid Charlie 7. I alerted the Overwatch team immediately and put the Forward Quick Reaction Element, QRE, on standby." Morrison paused mid-sip. He disliked being preempted. "You, what? You put QRE on standby without my direct order, Lieutenant?" Hartwell turned, meeting his eyes without flinching. Standard operating procedure, sir. A lapse of 30 minutes past expected comms loss in a contested zone triggers T1 response protocol. I only mobilized the standby, not the deployment. It was merely a readiness measure. Morrison bristled at the use of merely. He felt the slight of her professionalism against his authority. Lieutenant, your job is to coordinate my schedule and fetch my water. My job is to authorize T1 responses. Do you understand the difference in rank and responsibility? The silence that followed was thick, filled only by the distant whoomp 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 of a patrolling heavy helicopter circling the perimeter miles away. Understood, General, Hartwell said softly. The flatness was back, the mask perfectly replaced. Just as Morrison was about to deliver a sharper rebuke, something about the importance of respecting the chain of command, the base alarm system shrieked. It wasn't the tentative alert chime. It was the full, teeth-jarring, continuous wail of an immediate critical threat. The world seemed to drop into instantaneous slow motion. Incoming! Someone screamed from the radio relay booth. Multiple signatures, close range, mortar fire, they're inside the 3-kilometer perimeter. Morrison grabbed the edge of the map table, his cup of hot water instantly forgotten, steam billowing out and hitting his face as the building shook violently. The first incoming round, likely a 120-millimeter mortar, impacted somewhere near the motor pool. The sound, a monstrous, deafening crack, followed by the hideous ripping sound of shrapnel tearing through metal. Chaos erupted. The practiced calm of the command box vanished. Men who had been discussing football scores were now grabbing helmets and ballistic plates, adrenaline flooding the structure with a metallic tang. Status! Give me status! Morrison yelled, his voice strained, suddenly high-pitched. Hartwell, however, did not panic. She did not grab her helmet. She stood precisely where she was, her eyes fixed on the exterior reinforced wall, calculating, assessing. General, this is not a probing action, Hartwell stated, her voice cutting through the rising tide of fear with ice-cold clarity. They timed the mortars to coincide with the shift change rotation. They know our security schedule. This is a full-scale assault. The general, shaking slightly, was fumbling with the secure communication handset, trying to raise the perimeter defense chief. Where is Major Stevens? Where are the SEAL teams? Get them mobilized. Deploy the sentry guns. Another mortar round landed, closer this time, shaking the big box violently. The lights flickered, throwing the room into momentary darkness before the generators stabilized. Hartwell ignored the general's frantic commands. She was already moving, but she wasn't running for cover. She moved towards the armory locker built into the wall. Sergeant Miller, assume control of the comms log and prioritize outgoing distress signal, Hartwell ordered, her tone authoritative, a complete transformation from the subdued assistant of moments before. Sergeant Miller, a grizzled master sergeant usually immune to orders from a mere lieutenant, instinctively obeyed. Hartwell keyed in a 4-digit code on the reinforced locker. It hissed open. Inside, nestled among the standard-issue M4A1s, was a custom-fitted rifle case. She pulled it out. Hartwell, what the hell are you doing? I need you to coordinate the exfil plan Alpha. Morrison shouted, sweat beading instantly on his forehead. Hartwell didn't look at him. She opened the case. The rifle inside was long, dark, and specialized, an M110 SAS, a semi-automatic sniper system, not standard issue for an administrative aid. It was perfectly maintained, the optics pristine. General, she said, her voice now calm, lethal, almost clinical. Exfil Plan Alpha relies on air superiority. We have zero visibility due to the localized sandstorm they timed this attack with, and they have disabled the long-range radar. We are isolated. She lifted the rifle with practiced ease, checking the magazine feed and racking the bolt. The sound of the chambering round was sharp and definitive amidst the chaos. The SEAL QRE was hit hard 20 minutes ago, General. That's why Colonel Davies went silent, Hartwell continued, her eyes now scanning the real-time thermal overlay flickering on a nearby monitor. They were ambushed near the ravine entrance. They're running a casualty-heavy retreat. They cannot hold the north wall. Morrison staggered back, his face pale. How do you know that? The sensors only went down 5 minutes ago. Hartwell attached a heavy suppressor to the muzzle of the SAS. I listened to the faint telemetry bleed on the encrypted channel before they cut the feed. I logged the positional data. The enemy is exploiting the structural weakness at the junction of the north wall and the supply depot. That's where they'll breach. It is unreinforced and requires line-of-sight protection from the ridge. She threw off her administrative pack and pulled on a thin plate carrier vest that had been hidden beneath her desk. It was minimalist, non-standard, and packed with high-velocity 7.62mm ammunition. The perimeter defense forces are too thinly spread to cover that junction. I have 2 minutes before they gain effective breaching access, Hartwell stated, her eyes now the color of honed steel. I need a clear visual on the ridgeline, 400 meters northwest. Sergeant Miller, give me an active wind readout. Now. Miller, who was already responding to her orders faster than he was responding to the general's, stammered. Wind speed, 12 knots, shifting west to east, Lieutenant. Gusts up to 15. Hartwell nodded, already moving towards the secondary observation hatch in the reinforced roof. She was a different person. The stiffness was gone, replaced by fluid, lethal certainty. The air of the unseen, untouchable professional radiated from her. General Morrison stood frozen, clutching the ceramic mug which had grown cold in his hand. He was witnessing the collapse of his command structure and the simultaneous, terrifying rise of an unknown entity wearing the uniform of his personal assistant. Hartwell, you cannot leave the command box. That is an order. You are needed for communications, Morrison screamed. Hartwell paused at the roof access ladder. She clipped a secure, miniaturized satellite radio, a non-standard military unit, PRC-152, onto her shoulder harness. General, she said, looking down at him. Her expression was devoid of respect, or fear, or really any emotion at all. It was the look of a mechanic assessing a faulty engine. You need comms. I need a firing solution. The only way we get out of this is by eliminating the heavy weapons threat on that ridge. If they anchor their position there, we are cut off and destroyed by dawn. She did not wait for a reply. She scaled the ladder and shoved open the reinforced hatch, disappearing into the raging dust storm outside. Morrison stumbled towards the nearest monitor, pulling up the visual feed for the north wall. The dust was thick. Visibility was perhaps 50 meters, but the thermal imaging painted a horrifying picture. Multiple enemy formations, moving fast and low, exploiting the shadow of the ridgeline. They were carrying RPGs and heavy machine guns. He could hear the sharp, crackling static of Hartwell's radio coming through the main tactical speaker, a new, clean channel she had opened. Alpha 2, this is Phoenix. I am on station. Confirming visual on the primary heavy weapons position, 385 meters, range calibrated for 3.5 degrees of elevation and 12 knots crosswind. Hold fire until confirmation. Morrison recognized the call sign, Phoenix. It was an unofficial, classified designation used only by the deepest penetration teams, the ones that did not officially exist. He felt a chilling sense of dread. A new, slightly crackly voice responded on the secured line. The voice was female, European, and calm. Phoenix, this is Shadow 6. We confirm multiple contacts engaging the retreating element, QRE, near the ravine. They have an established sniper position at the apex of the ridge. They are using suppressed 7.62mm to cover the advance. You must neutralize that sniper first. Target acquisition 391 meters, bearing 345. Morrison looked wildly at Sergeant Miller. Who the hell is Shadow 6? That's not a local unit. Miller was hunched over the main console, adjusting the wind correction factors for Hartwell. Sir, I don't know. That frequency is highly restricted. It sounds like a Polish liaison frequency, but it's transmitting NATO encrypted. Outside, the sound of the base defense M240 machine guns was constant, desperate. The fight had come to the wire. Hartwell, exposed on the roof in the driving cold, settled into position. The wind tore at her uniform, chilling her instantly, but she adjusted her stance, using her body weight to anchor the M110. Her eye was pressed against the cold aluminum of the scope. She took 3 deep, controlled breaths, slowing her heart rate to a near-resting state, ignoring the adrenaline that was screaming at her to rush. She wasn't just shooting. She was analyzing the microenvironment. The wind was whipping the dust, but there was a brief, steady lull every 5 seconds when the gust passed the nearby radio antenna. She needed to fire during that lull. Shadow 6, I have the first sniper in sight, estimating 0.4-second flight time. Confirming ballistics, Hartwell murmured into her mic. Affirmative, Phoenix, clean shot, take him out. Shadow 6 urged, the calmness unsettling. Hartwell held her breath. Lull. Crack. The sound of the M110, suppressed, was still loud. A heavy, solid report that spoke of immense velocity. On the thermal screen inside the command box, The red heat signature representing the enemy sniper on the ridge apex simply vanished. No movement, no secondary flash, just an immediate, clean collapse. Sniper neutralized, Hartwell reported instantly. Moving to secondary target, RPG operator. He's masking in the shadow of the rock cluster. Wait, Phoenix. The SEAL team survivors are trapped near that cluster. Do not use fragmentation rounds. Headshots only. Shadow 6 warned. Acknowledged. Precision fire only, Hartwell affirmed. Morrison stared at the thermal screen. Hartwell had just executed a nearly 400-meter shot in a crosswind through a thick dust storm at night and hit a moving target who was partially concealed, and she had done it in less than 10 seconds from receiving the confirmation. This was not the work of a lieutenant tasked with fetching water. This was the work of a professional assassin honed to a razor edge. The next few minutes were a blur of calculated violence. Hartwell systematically dismantled the enemy's support structure on the ridge. Crack. RPG operator down. Crack, crack. 2 heavy machine gunners, silenced in quick succession. She was calling her own wind corrections, making minute adjustments to the SAS's elevation knob between shots. She wasn't guessing. She was performing complex, real-time fire control calculations. The enemy advance is slowing. Sergeant Miller suddenly shouted, pointing at the thermal. They've lost their cover fire. They're scattering. Phoenix, you have effectively pinned the advance. Shadow 6 relayed. But they are moving a breach team towards the junction. Estimated time to breach. 40 seconds. Do you have a visual on the breach team leader? Negative visual. They are hugging the earth, crawling through the drainage culvert. Hartwell replied, her voice now strained, not from fear, but from the extreme focus of the sustained effort. I need a higher perspective. Morrison realized she was talking about leaving the relative safety of the observation hatch. Hartwell, stay down. You're exposed, he yelled into the tactical mic, forgetting for a moment he wasn't her commanding officer in the field. General, get off my frequency, Hartwell ordered, the sheer authority in her tone silencing him completely. He watched, horrified, as on the thermal image, Hartwell's signature suddenly rose. She had stood up fully on the roof, silhouetted against the dark sky, ignoring the concentrated small arms fire now directed at her position. She was drawing their fire. Breach team leader sighted, she reported, her breathing now slightly ragged. 300 meters moving fast. Target confirmation. Carrying shaped charge. The muzzle flash of the enemy's rifles was bright white against the dust. Rounds were impacting the ballistic plates around the hatch. Shadow 6, I am taking heavy fire. This shot must neutralize him instantly. Hartwell, that is a high-risk shot. They are focusing on your heat signature. Do you confirm the probability of kill is over 95%? Shadow 6 demanded, the slightest tremor entering her voice. Confirmed. I am compensating for extreme close-range lateral movement. They won't know I've moved the 0 point until the round hits. Crack, crack, crack. 3 rapid shots delivered like a burst from a full auto weapon, except Hartwell was using a semi-auto. The shots weren't meant to kill. They were meant to force the breach team leader to shift his weight slightly. As the man stumbled momentarily, Hartwell delivered the final decisive blow. Ka-thump. The breach team leader vanished. The rest of the team hesitated, then recoiled, recognizing the sheer, precise lethality of the counterfire. They broke ranks and sprinted back towards the cover of the ravine. The junction was saved. The silence that followed, after the sustained, horrific din of the assault, was absolute. Only the persistent, dull thrum of the generators remained. Status report, Hartwell ordered, her voice cutting the silence. She sounded exhausted, but victorious. The enemy is retreating, Phoenix, Miller reported, his voice filled with awe. They've pulled back. We held the perimeter. Casualty report minimal inside the box. Thank God. Hartwell climbed back down the ladder. She entered the command box, the wind-whipped sand covering her uniform and equipment. She was still holding the M110, the suppressor barrel warm to the touch. General Morrison was standing exactly where she had left him, the cold ceramic mug still clutched in his hand. The initial shock had worn off, replaced by a terrible realization. He had just watched his administrative assistant save his entire command, possibly his life, and certainly his career, by operating with a skill set reserved for the top fraction of elite special operations forces globally. Lieutenant Hartwell, Morrison managed, his throat dry. What in God's name are you? Hartwell calmly unloaded the M110, placing the remaining rounds into a small pouch. She then field-stripped the weapon with mechanical, precise movements, wiping the barrel with a cleaning cloth, even as the metallic, charred smell of cordite filled the room. "I am your liaison officer, General," she replied, completely detached, "and I execute my duties as required by the mission parameters." "Required? You performed an unsanctioned, high-risk tactical counter-sniper operation. That is not in your job description, Lieutenant. Where did you learn to shoot like that? And who is Shadow 6? Morrison demanded, trying to reassert the authority that had evaporated 10 minutes prior. Hartwell did not answer immediately. She finished cleaning the bolt carrier group and reassembled the rifle, returning it to the specialized case. She wiped the sand from her face, rubbing her thumb across her temple. As she lowered her hand, she inadvertently pulled her collar down slightly. The stiff fabric had been obscuring her neck, but now, due to the exertion and the rough handling of the rifle, the collar snagged slightly. General Morrison was standing perhaps 3 feet from her. He looked past her shoulder, focused only on the skin of her neck, just below the hairline, partially hidden by the dark shadow of her bun. It wasn't a tattoo exactly, but a highly defined scar, deep and pale against her skin, shaped precisely like a trident. 3 short, perfect prongs, stylized, dark, almost black in the poor light. It was small, no larger than a thumbprint, and positioned exactly where the carotid artery ran. Morrison's breath hitched. His eyes widened, fixing on the scar. He had seen that symbol before. Not in official records, not in standard military intelligence briefs. He had seen it in classified, highly compartmented documents. Whispers, legends. He knew what the black trident meant. It was the mark of the Przeżyła Zasadzka, the survivor's mark. It was the insignia of the Jastrzębie Ghost Hawk, a Polish special operations unit, established and trained by NATO deep operators, specialized in intelligence denial and extreme hostile environment survival, believed to have been wiped out 5 years earlier in a massive, coordinated ambush in the Caucasus. Officially, they were ghosts. Unofficially, they were the best, most brutal operators ever trained on the Eastern Front. The trident was the symbol they carved into their own skin when they completed the ultimate survival protocol. A ghost unit operating without support, without designation, buried so deep they were dead to the world. Morrison felt the blood drain from his face. The ceramic mug, forgotten for the second time, slipped from his numb fingers. It hit the metal floor with a clattering, shocking sound, shattering into 3 large pieces. He looked at Lieutenant Hartwell. Her eyes met his. There was no longer a mask of detachment. There was a deep, ancient understanding, the silent acknowledgement between 2 people who know an unmentionable secret. He realized now why she carried that specific heavy ring. It wasn't jewelry. It was a weighted tool, a striking instrument used by operators who specialized in silent killing. He realized why Shadow 6 had sounded Polish. Jastrzębie, Morrison whispered, the name catching in his throat like broken glass. Hartwell merely blinked once, a small, subtle acknowledgement. They told us that entire unit was KIA in the 2020 operation, Morrison said, his voice now a terrified croak. That ambush, you survived that? She reached up and smoothed her collar, covering the scar again. The lieutenant was back. The assistant reappeared. General, there appears to be a miscommunication regarding my previous assignment, she stated neutrally. I was detached from a joint NATO deep reconnaissance program before my placement here. My profile has been restricted for obvious security reasons. Restricted, not by choice, but by absolute necessity. She was a weapon on loan, hidden in plain sight, ensuring his survival while he humiliated her for not fetching his coffee fast enough. Morrison swallowed hard, staring at the shattered ceramic on the floor. His perception of rank, of authority, of command, had been utterly inverted in the span of 15 minutes. He wasn't her superior. She was merely tolerating him. The comm center was still buzzing with adrenaline, but Hartwell ignored it. She moved to the broken mug, squatting down slowly. She picked up the largest shard of ceramic. General, she said, not looking up, her voice regaining the soft, flat quality it had before the attack. I apologize for the loss of your mug. I will file an inventory request for a replacement. She rose slowly, holding the piece of ceramic. She stepped past him, walking towards the disposal unit. Morrison stood ramrod straight, chest heaving slightly. The air in the command box, usually thick with his own self-importance, now felt impossibly thin, weighted down by her chilling competence. She passed him, heading toward the rear of the box. As she did, General Morrison did something he hadn't done since his first year in the academy, something completely involuntary, born of pure primal respect and sudden, profound fear of the lethal force he had just dismissed. He straightened his posture to parade rest. His right arm snapped up, his hand rigid, the salute perfect and sharp. He held the salute as Hartwell, the woman he had insulted, the woman who had just saved his life with the surgical precision of an M110 at 400 meters, walked past him, disposing of the evidence of his carelessness. Hartwell paused at the waste disposal unit, her back still to him. She did not return the salute. She did not acknowledge the gesture of profound deference. After a moment, she dropped the ceramic shard into the bin. The sound was a small, final clink. She then turned and faced him, her eyes once again the placid professional shade of a career administrator. "Is there anything else, General?" she asked. Morrison slowly lowered his hand, his arm trembling slightly. He looked at the shattered mug, then at the face of the Ghost Hawk survivor, the woman who had walked through an ambush that had killed an entire unit and emerged harder, sharper, and colder than the desert plateau she now defended. "No, Lieutenant," he said, "the respect unearned, purchased only by the blood spilled on the roof. There is nothing else. If you believe respect is earned by blood and not by rank, type respect in the comments."